G'day, Jason the Middle-Aged Gear Junkie here. If you've watched my channel for a little while, you know I've done a couple of videos called how to get an 80s clean sound and how to get an 80s hair metal tone. Well, today we're going to look at my generation of music, which was the 90s, and in particular, how to get a 90s alternative rock guitar tone. The 90s represented a massive change in rock music. In the 80s, artists were trying to get their hands on the latest and greatest music equipment that money could buy. Whereas in the 90s, we saw the rise of pawn shop gear, or what we now today call vintage gear. A lot of bands from this era, particularly early on, didn't have a whole lot of money, and they couldn't go out and buy the flashiest rack gear or anything like that all the top hair metal bands were using. So they had to make do with these old amplifiers, old guitars, and old effects. And as a result, we have a more sort of organic rock tone. Whereas you can really pinpoint and say that the Marshall Stack was kind of the drive sound of the 80s. There isn't one amplifier, I think, that represents the 90s as a whole. So to deal with this, what I'm going to do is use a couple of different drive pedals to get different types of drive sounds. So the first pedal that I need is something that's going to provide just a slight amount of breakup, like a valve amp that's just starting to go over the edge and break up. And the pedal I've chosen for this is the Love Pedal Eternity Drive, which is an excellent light gain overdrive. It has a few different modes, one of them being treble boost, which is pretty handy as well. And I'm going to use it for all the sort of lighter gain stuff. Choosing a modulation pedal for this rig was quite difficult because a lot of bands were still using chorus in the early 90s, but it was rapidly going out of fashion. And likewise with flanger. For me, the defining modulation sound for these alternative bands was actually phaser. Now, phaser was an effect that was popular in the 70s and went out of fashion in the 80s, and I think it made a bit of a comeback because, again, that whole pawn shop thing where nobody wanted them, they were sitting in pawn shops and people were buying them really cheap. They were buying old Electro-Harmonix Bad Stone and Small Stones and ones like this, the MXR Phase 90. This is my script logo one. And you can get Leslie type sounds by turning it up. A lot of bands in that period also brought back the Leslie speaker as well. And I'm going to use it in tandem with the Love Pedal Eternity Drive as well. For my heavier drive tones, I use this, the Friedman BE-OD. Now, OD usually stands for overdrive. In this case, this is not an overdrive. This is a full-blown distortion pedal. And not only is it a distortion pedal, but it's probably in the top 3 best distortion pedals I've ever played. That's how good and how highly I regard this pedal. Now, it's got bass and treble, but we also have a presence knob, and then for me, the real winner here is the tight knob. So by turning the tight knob down, it changes the bass response, and so it makes the bass really thick and woolly down here. So it almost emulates almost sort of fuzzy tones. So I was able to do Smashing Pumpkins and that sort of thing without using a fuzz pedal. And then when you turn it up, you get a more precise and tighter bass response. And it was a really good all-purpose distortion, which I was able to get a lot of different tones out of. I'm putting together a pedal board, I usually have a delay or a reverb or both. Now, in the 90s, reverb was an effect that had sort of gone out of fashion, and delay wasn't widely used by a lot of guitar players. I mean, there were some guys who used it a fair bit, but in general, it wasn't an effect that you heard all the time. But one effect I think that did pop up a fair bit was wah. Wah made a bit of a comeback in the 90s. You didn't hear it that often in the 80s, but I think people found wah pedals really cheap in pawn shops and went out and bought them. Jerry Cantrell springs to mind. He used it a lot with his lead lines. Of course, Tom Morello used a wah. Kim Thale from Soundgarden, Mike Einzinger, the list goes on. But wah definitely made a huge comeback in the 90s, and it was used a lot of different ways. I'm going to show you demonstrations of guys who used it in a cocked fashion, where you sort of pick a position and you leave it there. For rhythmic enhancement and also just filtering, and they're just such a versatile pedal, and I think every guitar player needs a wah somewhere at some stage. So that was my 90s rig. Let me know if you think I did a good job. Let me know what you would do differently, and also let me know what songs I forgot to play, because I know I forgot to play a few. So let me know the bands that you love from that period, and the sorts of sounds that you really would love to emulate in the comments below. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. Remember, you can join the Middle Age Gear Junkie Facebook page by clicking the link in the description below. Other than that, my name is Jason, and I hope you have a wonderful day. See you later.